Hello. Welcome back to my channel. I am Monet and you're watching Life is Monet. I am in a genre shifting kind of mood. I feel like lately I've been reading for like my physical TBR that I set for each month and then doing some type of like content related reads. And now I want to pick a book solely for myself. While I don't exactly know what genre or what type of book I want to read, I do know that I want something that is going to be a palate cleanser and just a change of pace from what I've read so far. I've gone through my bookshelves and I have pulled out 8 books that are just very obscure and different from what I've read so far. Something that would just be a great change of pace. What I'm going to do is try a chapter of each of these 8 books to help me decide, one, moving them up in terms of priority on my shelves, because right now they're just kind of out there in the ether. I'll know that I want to still read them. I know that I'll pick them up at some point, but I really don't have a timeline for when that's possible. And so I'm kind of hoping to get a feel of my sense of urgency with each of these reads, but also I'm hoping that I'll get the excitement to pick up one of these books right now. The first book is one that's been sitting on my shelf for a while. Ironically, there was an audiobook sale a little over a year ago and I managed to get the entire series in audiobook, so I'm very excited about that. And that's going to be The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams. This is set in the city of Abora, where there is a crumbling or falling empire. We're following a group of miscreants. One of them, I believe, is a witch. And so I'm always excited to see like witches and sorcerers within my stories. It's one of my favorite character tropes. Somehow they're going to get caught up in this conspiracy to save a failing empire. The next book is going to be The Library of the Unwritten. I actually physically own the entire series, so the sooner I pick this up, the better, honestly. We're following Claire, who is a head librarian at this library that's kind of like set in hell, but it's supposed to be this neutral space where stories that are unfinished by their authors reside, and her job consists of basically keeping the books organized and making sure that the characters from the story that like to materialize as real people don't escape the library. When one unlikely hero actually escapes his book, it is Claire's job to go and track him down. This rescue mission goes entirely wrong when Claire is attacked by an angel who is convinced that she has the devil's Bible, and now she's caught up in a power struggle between heaven and hell. The next book is another one that I own the entire series for. If you're noticing a trend here, I didn't do this on purpose, but it's kind of working out like that, which I'm not mad at all, because, you know, we can always get books off our physical TBR. And that book is going to be The Diviners. We are following Evie in 1926, who has just been excommunicated from her hometown, and she is absolutely ecstatic about that. The only downside is that she has to go live with her uncle in New York City, who is obsessed with the occult. Her biggest concern is making sure that she can keep her supernatural ability a secret from her uncle, which has only ever brought her trouble before. But then her uncle is called to this crime scene of a girl that is left with this mysterious symbolic symbol, and Evie discovers that her supernatural ability can actually help catch a serial killer. I've only read one other YA historical fantasy, but I really loved it, and that was The Last Magician by Lisa Maxwell. And I know that this series has such a huge fandom for it. There's some people that really love it and some people that really hate it. But I feel like The Last Magician series by Lisa Maxwell is kind of like the same thing, and I was one of the people that actually really loved it. And so I feel more confident picking up this series. The next one is a series that I'm not necessarily intimidated by, but for some reason, I keep kind of dragging my feet and kicking the can down the road in terms of starting it. And now I'm in the mood to possibly pick it up, and I want to take advantage, and that's going to be The Grace of Kings. This is another book that I'm not necessarily clear on the synopsis of. I do know that we are in this world that used to have 7 separate kingdoms, and they were united under one emperor who everyone assumed would bring peace and prosperity, but it turns out it brought nothing but suffering. And so there is a pending rebellion within this world. I've heard that this is a pretty dense fantasy book. That's not something that really bothers me as long as I'm in the mood for it, and so I'm really hoping that I enjoy this first chapter so that I can grab it while like my mood and my interests are aligned. Next book is going to be Exit West. I purchased this on a personal recommendation from a very close friend of mine, and so I really don't know what this book is about. My general understanding is that it is a dystopian or like maybe post-apocalyptic book where we're following different characters as they go through the motions of that. But this one I need to read the first chapter of just to get more clarity on what the book is even freaking about. The next book might be a bit of a gothic read, but the synopsis sounds really interesting, and that is going to be The Revelator. Our main character, Stella, was left in the care of her grandmother when she was just a young child, and there is mysterious woods surrounding her grandmother's house where the personal gods of her family actually reside. Something happens that causes Stella to flee and leave, and now she's returning back to her grandmother's home for her funeral years after this tragic incident happened. Her grandmother ends up adopting a little girl while Stella was gone, and this little girl seems to have a connection to Stella's past, this tragic incident, and the very destructive gods of her family. Yet another book that I don't know the synopsis of. This was absolutely a cover buy for me a couple of years ago because I thought that this was freaking stunning. It was at my half price books, and it was so like it looked so new that I just needed to have it. Since I've purchased this book, I've come to find about myself that I do not enjoy space opera sci-fis. It's just, the setting does not work for me. But when I purchased this book, I was in an era of like deniability where I was determined that it wasn't me, it was the authors, and I was going to find the space opera sci-fi book that was going to work for me. As I continue to read other space operas, that optimism has just been beaten out of me because I generally don't enjoy them. And so I have been pushing this book further down the road in terms of me reading it because I'm so afraid that I'm not going to enjoy it. And again, like the cover is just so freaking beautiful that I feel like I put it off so long because I didn't want to be disappointed. But it is time for me to try a chapter to see if this book is going to be for me. The last book I'm going to be testing out is Age of Vice. The story kicks off with a Mercedes that has jumped a curb and hit and killed 5 people and is being driven by an employee of a very rich family that has no idea what they were doing, how they got in the car, or even what was happening. And somehow this is going to start to unravel this very powerful, wealthy, and influential family. Okay, so we have all 8 of the books that we're going to try a chapter for in this vlog. I will come back and update you guys as I move through each book. Why is it that every time I am shopping by myself with no influence and I see a book that I'm just drawn to and I pick it up and buy it on a whim, I end up loving it? I found so many of my favorite fantasy books like that, and I don't know, I love that for me, but I'm also very disappointed because Saturn Run was so damn interesting that it might have been the one space opera that I picked for myself that I would have actually enjoyed. But here we are. The first chapter was very short. It was 9 pages long. Standard adult sci-fi space operas where you have so much like info dumping in the beginning of the story. Oddly enough, I actually understood the info dumping. Between me and you, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. When I read sci-fi books that are set in like space on different planets and stuff like that, physically reading it does nothing for my visuals, nothing for my mental. I have no thoughts, head empty. I can never picture what they're talking about in the story. Like A Memory Called Empire, excellent book. I didn't love it, but it's a great freaking book. Could I picture anything that was happening in that story? No. And she described it to me in so much detail. It was so verbose, and I feel like she wasted it because I couldn't visualize nothing. I don't know why that's a shortcoming for me, because it doesn't happen in literally any other like genre. Like you can give me a world, an entirely new fantasy world, and I can visualize it perfectly fine. Like you could put me anywhere, but putting me on a different planet in the Milky Way, baby, I'm gonna need pictures. I'm gonna need y'all to start turning these into picture books if you really want me to keep up. I'm shocked that I actually could picture the stuff that he was talking about, even though I had no freaking clue what it was. We start off with Joe, who is traveling to this space station that I guess is in orbit that is watching Saturn. I didn't really get a clear picture of that, but he's conducting a routine service and it's supposed to be easy peasy lemon squeezy. And so because he's up there, he's kind of like talking about what he's doing, what they think might be wrong. They're kind of like diagnosing it on his way to the space station or space whatever object. And when he gets there, the problem is exactly kind of like what he assumed it was going to be. And it's supposed to be a very, very quick fix. And in the meantime, he's talking about the world. The groundwork for the politics so far has been very easy to understand because he's American, I'm guessing. And so back on Earth, there is some very anxious CEOs that are concerned that he's going to go up there and discover that there needs to be this multi-million-dollar fix to the space station to get it back working properly. And so he's kind of just like, yeah, they got their panties up in the wad. There's a little bit of sarcasm throughout the story, but otherwise it puts you in the place of like kind of like The Martian by Andy Weir, where like you can understand the concern of the people back on Earth to what's happening in space. And so he completes the fix, and that is supposed to be the very tricky part. And the next part he says is so easy that a monkey could do it, which pretty much just lays the groundwork for whatever is going to happen after in the next chapter is going to go terribly wrong. And I'm very excited. But do I want to start it right now? Kinda. Like if I got the audiobook for this, I would certainly start it right now. But am I going to unhaul it? No. I need to start just trusting my own taste. And it's not even my taste, right? Because I didn't read the synopsis of this book. There's just a certain thing that happens when I see a book on the shelf and it becomes like tunnel vision. Like something about the book, I'm drawn to it. And maybe, I don't know, it's the bookish gods that are leading me to my next 5-star read. But it happens 9 times out of 10 when I'm in half-price books. And so I'm very sad because the place that I just moved to doesn't have a half-price books. So how am I going to have that same like magic if there's no half-price books for me to do that? It doesn't happen to me very often at like Barnes & Nobles. I'm so sad. So Revelator was interesting. It started off very slow. We have Stella as she's arriving with her father to her grandmother's house, and it's 1926, and he's having a hard time finding work. So you know that it's the early era of the Great Depression, and so he feels so much pressure. She doesn't have her mom in her life. She's an only child from what I gather so far, and so he's taking her with her mother's side of the family to stay with her grandmother, and she really wants him to promise her that he's going to return for her once he finds work, but he is intentional about dodging making such a promise to her. Near her grandmother's house, there is this church that she goes inside, and within the church, she finds a secret passage, and she's very excited because she's a little girl, and you know, she's read stories about things like this all the time, and so she goes through the secret passage, and she comes like to a tree, and inside the tree is a creature, and her grandmother shows up. She gets in trouble. She's reprimanded, and her grandmother basically tells her to never go back within the church itself, but she is like very curious about this creature in a tree in a church. Even in the first chapter, there was quite a few biblical undertones to the story. It seems like this is going to be character-centric as well as a mystery, and I'm not exactly sure if we can trust our main character Stella and her perspective over what's happening around her, especially because right now she is just a child, and so we don't really know if her perspective over what happened versus, you know, her imagination are in alignment with one another. I do know that from the synopsis there's going to be a time jump, and Stella's going to return back to her grandmother's property as an adult, and so I am looking forward to that shift in perspective. This is not one that I feel the need to pick up right now or really anytime soon. I think that the cover's freaking beautiful, and I know that like I want to get to it, I want to read it, but I feel really no sense of urgency, and it's also not one that I feel like I'm in the mood for right now. Okay, so The Diviners feels like a 4 or 5 star read at a minimum. Like, this was so interesting that this is one that I feel like I want to pick up ASAP. I believe that the first chapter is going to be more of like a prequel because we are at this party and we have this hostess and her party's getting kind of dull and she's desperate to like liven it up. And so you have this setting of like this 1920s New York, Great Gatsby feel. She calls herself like a true flapper. And so she's like, okay, let me go and get this Ouija board that my mom bought that she paid a lot of money for. But she doesn't necessarily believe that this Ouija board is as demonic or evil as people say. Her and her party goers start playing with this Ouija board, and they get a very dark and ominous message from someone named Naughty John, who is basically promising to rain down hell on them. And they're like convinced that like this is just someone pulling a prank, even though everyone removed their hands from the Ouija board and it was still moving and spelling out things, which how could you just ignore that? But here we are. The guy who sold the Ouija board to the hostess told her that if she was to summon spirits, she has to like close the door by spelling out goodbye on the Ouija board. But then she's like, you know what, he was just trying to make a buck and sell something to me, so I guess it doesn't really matter. And then they kind of just go back to the party having a good time. And there's something very dark and destructive that's going on in the background of the story. And the author really takes this time to set the stage for New York City, the highlights and the lowlights, everyone coming here with money versus those that are struggling to survive that doesn't have money. And I really just enjoyed the description of New York City during this time period. I actually really loved the historical elements of New York City between like the early 1900s and 1930s. It is a very interesting time period where everyone was just coming. There was a lot of immigration into the nation, and everyone just had this idea and hopes for like the American dream. The Statue of Liberty was so much more meaningful during this time period. And so I was just so invested in the world. And that's something that I just really enjoyed when I read the Last Magician series. And so it's very nice to get the same feel from that. I actually really enjoyed the writing style. I feel like it's very palatable, very accessible, and it does what it needs to do in a limited amount of words. And so this feels like it's going to be a very great time, and I'm very sad that I left it on my shelves for like 4 or 5 years. 3 books down, 5 more to go. I think I'm going to try The Grace of Kings next because I'm afraid that that was going to be a very long chapter and it's getting late. So I want to make sure that I get my reading in of that one before I continue to the other ones. Okay, The Grace of Kings was so easy to get into. This is my type of fantasy. This feels like something I'm definitely going to enjoy. There are some things logistically that I feel like is preventing me from starting this book right now, even though I feel like it's something that I would really love. One, I'm in the middle or close to finishing a few too many series, and I want to wrap up 2 of them because I'm so close. I just need to read the final book. Also, this is something that I feel like I want to read on ebook. While the writing is not as dense as I expected, it's actually very welcoming, I feel, to a fantasy reader. I do feel like there's going to be times where I want to jump back to to something that happened previously within the story. And I want to be able to do that really quickly. And I feel like the best way for me to do that is to not just annotate or tab it, but to actually mark it up within the ebook versions. That's just really what's stopping me from starting the series right now. I think that I'm going to set a plan for maybe like July or August, because in the summertime is when I kind of always hit reading slumps. There's just something about reading in the summertime that does not really work for me. But I think if I plan to pick up a series that I know that I'm really going to enjoy during the months where I typically just don't have the motivation to read, it'll probably coax me through my usual like annual reading slump. So I'm actually really looking forward to reading The Grace of Kings, and I've been seeing some very beautiful editions of these books. I think the UK covers are stunning, and so yeah, maybe I kind of want to get my hands on those because I don't own the whole series in paperback actually, so I still have time to do that. But yeah, moving this up on the TBR priority, but we won't be picking it up right now. I feel like if I was going to pick up any one of the 4 books that I've read so far, it would most likely be The Diviners. That feels like what I'm in the mood for right now, but I wanted to have several options, so 4 more to go. The Library of the Unwritten is certainly interesting. There is a great like intro to the story that I feel like really explains what's happening within the book. Stories want to change, and it is a librarian's job to preserve them. That's the natural order of things. The unwritten wing of the library, for all its infinite magic and mystery, is in some ways a futile project. No story, written or unwritten, is static. Left abandoned too long and given the right stimulation, a book goes wrong in the head. It is a story's natural ambition to wake up and start telling itself to the world. And so that is a apt description of what's happening. We are in this library that exists within this astral plane in hell. It is not servicing hell. It doesn't work for hell. It's just, that's where it's located. And this library is being run by Claire, who is a librarian. And she's just basically trying to make sure that these books that are unwritten, I guess at some point they're supposed to be written, they don't just get antsy and just create a version of themselves until they actually become a written thing. And it is her job to put these manifestations back into the unwritten books. And she has a sense of like impatience with it. You can tell that she's frustrated with her job and with just having to do this thing. And there is a sense of like brutality that she is desensitized from because she's had to do this so many times, and she just doesn't see these characters or these manifestations of characters that are unwritten as anything real. And so they're just like lively paper that is her job to put back into the book. The world itself is set up a little bit like The Good Place, if you've ever seen that show, which is about this afterlife of people that think that they're in heaven, they're in a utopia, but there's a bit of a twist in a setup. All utopias actually are just like dystopias. And the way that this show showcases the logistical systems and bureaucracies in place of running something like that, it is very similar to this because the devil, I guess, sends down a demon to tell the library that they are missing a character from an unwritten book. And I'm guessing from the synopsis that it's going to be the devil's Bible that actually hasn't been written yet. And so she's being sent out to go and retrieve this character. It feels like a book that I would be very interested in, but it's not one that I want to read right now. But I am going to try to find a prompt when I do my monthly TBRs to make this fit into, because I feel like just for a regular monthly TBR, this is something I would want to add. I did not expect the genre, or I guess I didn't pay attention to the fact that this was like a crime action thriller type book. So I was pleasantly surprised at like the speed in which the story took off. We are in 2004 and we're in a specific northern part of India. I feel like there's a lot of cultural references and setups to the world that I'm not necessarily aware of yet. So I do want to get more context in the story so that I can really take in everything that the author is doing with the book. But this Mercedes has just jumped this curb and hit and killed 5 people, and inside the car is Ajay, and he is entirely drunk, unresponsive, and the police see him as this lower class poor citizen, and so they immediately resort to like violence and mistreatment. And it feels a little like I don't want to say heavy-handed, but it is very directly in your face. The social commentary that the author is doing within the story and the setups of the classes, and that feels very intentional. And so Ajay is like going through the system. He's being convicted. There's a lot of news articles being printed about him, and people find out that he works for this very, very wealthy family, and they believe that he has stolen a bottle of liquor and the car from this family and committed this crime. So he is convicted and sent to jail, and he is very detached and twice removed from the story. And the writing style actually matches that. We're watching these things happen from a distance, and it feels like we're more of a fly on the wall, and that our main character Ajay is just very detached from what's happening within the story. And then there's a bit of a break in the dam, because he takes all of this without fail and he doesn't respond or really say anything. And then when he gets to prison, everyone's trying to tell him to get involved with gangs and to be protected, and they get the sense that he is innocent of whatever he's been convicted of, and that he's just another casualty of a wealthy man or a wealthy boss in India. And something happens where he's attacked in the beginning of the story in prison, and he snaps and ends up physically harming all the men that were jumping on him and cutting him. And so it kind of creates like this, like our main character is so interesting, and like maybe I believe that he didn't do the crime, or he wasn't as culpable as one might believe or what's being printed in the news articles, but he is definitely more than what is on the surface, and I feel like he has a bit of a story to tell. I noticed that the second chapter jumps in the past, so I think we're going to be following a younger Ajay and getting to know him. I actually feel like that is going to be a necessity because the story is told from such a distance, and I'm a very character-driven reader, and so if I'm going to be a fly on the wall, then I think you need to like take me through all the different stages so I can really understand him as a character. But I'm also just concerned, like, is he gonna be the only POV? Because I feel like the story needs another POV, especially if he is working for a like wealthy and powerful but also like criminal type family. Like, it gives the vibe that he's working for some type of like mob or mafia. So it's very interesting. I feel like this is a book that I would want to read in a vlog, because it allows me to give a lot of commentary and really talk through what's happening in the story. And so I don't think that I would put this on my physical TBR, but if I was planning out content or doing a weekly type vlog, I feel like this is a book that I would certainly gravitate towards. It is one that I am very looking forward to reading, because I feel like I would enjoy it, especially because I didn't expect it to be a thriller. So that's always just refreshing. I feel like I am having such a good streak of luck with the books on my shelf. Like, it's going so well, and I missed this vibe. Like, of course, these are books that I purchased because I thought that I would like them, and shopping my own shelves is just so much more pleasant an experience than having to shop like at a bookstore, because I feel like this never goes as well. Like, when I try to read a couple pages in a store, I'm constantly like, yeah, no, put it down, put it down. But like, all of these books have been vetted, and so I'm just having a really good time. The Ninth Reign has a pretty explosive 7-page prologue, and at first I was like, I don't think that I'm gonna get a lot about the book in the first 7 pages, especially because it is a prologue. But we are with a female. Her name is Hestelian, and she's with a little boy who's human. And there is a clear distinction between whatever type of creature or beast or whatever she is, and him being a human boy. But he is visiting the city of Abora, and he is looking at their tree god. And there's a little bit of world building, because something happened years ago where there was these beasts, and the tree like rained down a certain type of rain on them and ended up like destroying them. The little boy in a lot of ways feels like a tourist, and she is just showing him around this way. And then something happens where like she kills him and sacrifices his blood to the tree. And I guess the tree is like, it hasn't been active, or it's not alive, or something's happening with the tree where she feels the need to make this ritual sacrifice, and then nothing occurs. And so she feels like she has failed to like bring this tree back, which I guess goes into like why the city of Abora would be dying, because maybe like this tree that they're worshiping isn't bearing fruit like it used to before. The previous war that happened with these beasts was called the Eighth Reign, and so just the title itself makes me feel like somehow this tree is going to come back into focus. But yeah, 7 pages, and I was really like, I completely let my guard down, because I was like, I don't know what I expect to get from a 7-page prologue. Like, I won't know enough about the story, and I was really considering maybe going like past the prologue and reading the actual first chapter. But yeah, this was very interesting. Another series. I feel like I'm gonna read this entire series in a special vlog for my Patreon. So if you are a Patreon member, you can expect to see this sometime in the near future. It'll definitely happen sometime this year, but yeah, I feel like I want to read the entire series. I only physically own book one, so this is one that I'll be reading via audiobook. But yeah, I plan to do a special vlog for this one. And we are going into our last test chapter, and I'm very excited because I've had so much fun so far. I don't feel the need to unhaul any books, and so that's always great because these books have been sitting on my shelf for a long time. I think that besides Age of Vice, which is a new release, all of these books have been on my shelf for over a year, a lot of them 2, 3, maybe even 4 years, and my reading taste changed so much over time. I'm very happy that I still am interested in reading books that I bought years ago, even though I'm not necessarily the same reader. I'm not exactly sure why I thought this was a dystopian, but while I still don't know what the heck it's about, I don't think that it's a dystopian, but it does feel like it might be a sci-fi type of story, but I'm still not sure what this book is about. There's Muslim representation within the story. We're meeting Saeed as he meets a girl named Nadia, and they have their first interaction, and it's a very short one, and then the story just kind of takes a turn, and it starts to really describe Saeed's mother and father and how they came to be with one another. It's very descriptive. It relies a lot on like literary visions of the personality traits of his parents. And then we take another digression to Australia, to a woman where a man just kind of emerged out of the shadows of her home and then climbed through her window. And then we go back to Saeed's parents, but while we're learning about them and their, again, personality traits, there's a repeated line of like, this is what's happening before Saeed met Nadia. So you get the sense that his interaction with this girl, while it was very short and unremarkable in a lot of ways, them coming together and their conversions of meeting each other in their lifetime is going to be significant in some way, shape, or form. Except you don't exactly know what. I did read the synopsis of this one, and it says that like their country is going to have a civil war, and when violence starts to escalate, people start to talk about these doors that can take you from your homeland, and you just step through it and you're in an entirely different like life or reality. And so Nadia and Saeed are going to feel pressured to do so, and I guess once they step through this world and emerge into like this alien and uncertain future, they're going to have to rely on their hold on one another, their past, and their sense of who they are, which kind of makes sense as to why the author is putting so much emphasis on like minute details about Saeed's parents. I don't know if they're like setting the groundwork for us to really understand him, but I also wonder if this is going to be like dual POV. It's very, very short. And I don't know, stories like this where I am going into a sci-fi expecting a real sci-fi element, but instead I get a true like analyzing and like introspection of humanity and mankind and individuals and who we are and how that contributes to like the way we experience things. I never really know how to feel about those books because they are sci-fi or they have a sci-fi landscape, but they're mostly literary fictions, and I was not expecting that with the story. But I've seen so many people love this, and when I purchased it, several people were like, you were gonna like that book. So I'm taking your word for it. I didn't dislike it. The writing is very nice. I'm always conflicted when we have like this genre bending story because I need to know how to adjust my expectations. I feel like there still may be a deep sci-fi component to the story because if they're stepping through doors and like going into alien worlds, like what is that going to look like? And is the author going to describe that to us, or are we going to just have our characters go into these new realities, but we're still just looking deeply at them and who they are and how this new reality changes them and how they become different people? Because then I feel like, yeah, I need to get clarity on that. I need to ask someone who has read this book. Should I expect to just watch them change, or am I going to get to like experience this new world with them? because then that will determine whether or not I'm gonna like this book. This sums up all of the 8 books that I tried a chapter for. Saturn Run is one that I feel like I will pick up sometime soon. It may be the one sci-fi opera that I actually enjoy, so I'm looking forward to that, because maybe, you know, I can prove myself wrong, and that I need to keep hope alive. Like, there is that space opera out there for me that I will enjoy, but we'll see. I don't want to get my hopes up too high. And then we have Age of Vice, which you can expect to see in a vlog sometime in the future. Exit West, I feel like I need to be in the right mood to pick that up, but I also need more clarity on my expectations for that book so it can be appropriate. I feel like Revelator is another book that I need to be in the mood for. The Diviners is one I want to pick up ASAP. The Grace of Kings is one I plan to start whenever I finish whatever series I'm close to ending so far. The Library of the Unwritten is one I plan to put on a monthly TBR as soon as I can find a prompt that fits it. And then The Ninth Reign is a series that I plan to start again after I finish one of my current ones, but it will be a Patreon exclusive. If you have made it to the end of this video, comment down below, 1, which book you think I'm going to love the most, and 2, which book you might be picking up based off the chapters that I tried in this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in my next one.